This thing is very important. I have to tell you something. Last night I was so really touched by the great talk that Dr. Bjorn gave us. You know, I was kind of down a little bit until this morning, and Mr. McCollin consoled me. And the reason is very simple, because they had, all the other speakers had slides. I have no slides. So you have to forgive me, but I will try my best not to in a way, this is really, after 26 years in the Vatican, I know that this is siesta time. So I don't want to annoy you. That's one of the reasons. But anyhow, I would like to thank in a very special way, first of all, the citizens count. The citizens do count in so many different ways. So this is a great conference. I have witnessed so many other conferences, you know, but I like this conference in a very special way. I like also their program. Learn, discuss, and then engage. But in between, I would like to put another word, if I may suggest. A word which is so loved by our moderator, namely dialogue. Without dialogue, we will never get anywhere. I'm dealing with 193 delegations from all over the world at the United Nations, and I know how dialogue is so essential. That's why on my way down, up here in New Hampshire, I was coming back from Rome the night before last, and I was reading this Time magazine article by Paul Krugman. And it says, you know, America, I don't think I should put my glasses here, you know, America is now ruled by people who are willing to endanger a civilization for political expediency. Well, I don't agree with this guy. I believe that we have something that we should take into consideration. A lot of things can be done. The reason is very simple. In 2014, we had a conference in the UN by some great scientists. The title was Science and Peace. And there was this wonderful professor who really impressed me. His name is Hitoshi Murayama. And he teaches at UC Berkeley. He's professor of physics. At one point, and I quote him because it's very interesting, he says, you know, how he comes from Japan, however, he has so many other friends and colleagues who really gave him a universal approach to our situation. And then he says, I believe the world needs more places where dialogue can become the normal rule of the world. To make it clear, you know, he really gave a beautiful way of understanding that we are on this rock, he calls, the earth. And we're also here, you know, just to try as much as we can to make this rock. And he gave us some figures that really amazed me. We live on a tiny piece of rock called the planet Earth that circles around an average star called the sun. In a rural area of 27,000 light years away from the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which is only one out of 100 billion galaxies in the visible universe. Now, if you see this big picture, then you will understand, you know, how important it is for us to get together, to dialogue. And that really made such a great impression on me. But now I have to come to the most important part of that was just an introduction. I will focus now my intervention on a special encyclical letter. Someone asked me, what is an encyclical letter? Is that an infallible statement? You know how the press, plays on these kind of things. It is not. It's just a letter that Pope Francis addressed not only to Catholics, but to all men and women of goodwill around the world. Now, the theme, by the way, the name is taken from St. Francis of Assisi, Laudato Si. This man was so enamored with nature and creation that he gave us one of the most beautiful hymns to creation. As you do know, the Canticle of Brother Sun. And so the first words of this beautiful hymn are Laudato Si. May you be lauded, praised. And that's on the theme of integral ecology. The Holy Father turns to see how also climate change can influence global peace. Now, I have to tell you, the other title of this encyclical is On Care of Our Common Home. That was issued on May 24th, 2015. It's a unique in the sense that it aims to bring into dialogue all persons and peoples, all institutions and organizations that share the concern for our common home. In fact, the Pope begins by addressing himself not just to Catholics. It's an encyclical, normally is addressed to Catholics. No. And I quote, to every person living on the planet. All of us. So, I'm trying, I had written something like 15 pages long, but the moderator allowed me 3 hours, but I don't think you will like that. I have a plane to catch to go back to New York. So, the earth, our common home, is like a sister with whom we share our life and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. And so he continues. He shows us just how inseparable is the bond between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. Now, midway through the encyclical to Laudato Si, we find this question, and I think this has been proposed before by some of our speakers. What kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? And so the Holy Father, this question continues, this question does not have to do with the environment alone and in isolation. The issue cannot be approached piecemeal. We have to go on and understand more. Now, it is clear that in this letter is not only on climate change, but also especially on ecology, a much bigger topic that includes climate change. This is obvious from the questions that the Pope himself is proposing to himself and to us. Now, today, the earth, our sister, is mistreated, abused, is lamenting, and its groans join those of all the world forsaken and discarded people. So, it's not only nature. So Pope Francis invites us to listen to them, urging each and every one, individuals, families, local communities, nations, the international community, to an ecological conversion. And then it goes on, to explain a few important things I will pass on. Then he acknowledges the awareness that is growing today, along with concern for the damage that is being done to earth. The Pope keeps a hopeful outlook on the possibility of reversing this trend. He says, and I quote, "Humanity still has the ability to work together in building our common home. Men and women are still capable of intervening in the positive against those who might despair that we will make the type of changes necessary." He stresses, and I quote, "All is not lost. Human beings, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves, choosing again what is good, and making a new start." At the heart of the process of conversion, my dear friends, and of hope and a renewed future, the Pope puts the concern of integral ecology. Integral ecology. That's the central point of the whole document. And it's a special able to articulate the fundamental relationship of the persons, not only with God, not only with him or her herself, with other human beings, and with creation. And this brings us to the second part of my presentation, integral ecology. Now, what is this integral ecology, which is the heart of the letter of Pope Francis? Pope Francis says, integral ecology is one that clearly respects its human and social dimensions, unquote. We find three pillars in this letter of this integral ecology, namely environment, economy, social. It is fundamental to underscore that everything is interconnected, and that just as different aspects of the planet, physical, chemical, biological, are interrelated, so too living species are part of a network that we will never fully explore and understand. By the way, I want you to know that this letter was written by the Pope, issued by the Pope. There were so many scientists, important scientists, actually none of them Catholics, I have to tell you, that were working on this document. And our own moderator had something to do when he went to Rome to kind of help in some way. So here we have the three pillars. One, environmental ecology. This is a relationship existing between nature and the society that we live in. We are part of nature. We are included in it. And thus, we are in constant interaction with it. Our action will always have an impact on nature, may positive or negative. But if we have a good look around us, we can see the extent of pollution. It is essential to seek comprehensive solutions to this problem, the Holy Father says. Then we have the economic ecology. And I quote, "Economic growth tends to produce predictable reaction and certain standardization with the aim of simplifying procedures and reducing cost. There can be no real development without the protection of the environment." Finally, the third is social ecology. We said earlier that everything is related, and so the health of a society's institutions has consequences for the environment and the quality of human life. Every violation of solidarity and civic friendship harms the environment. Pope Francis declares in a very clear terms this statement. The Pope continues to explain better what this integral ecology is by underlying other two ecologies, cultural and the ecology of the daily life. Now, cultural ecology, this is really interesting, distinguishes the historic, artistic, cultural patrimony of a people from the patrimony of nature. It too is under threat, culture, and needs to be preserved if we want to preserve our original identity. Ecology also involves protecting the cultural treasures of humanity, the Pope says, in the broadest sense. Culture is much more than what we have inherited from the past. Culture is a living, dynamic, participatory, present reality. There was a great man I often read, and I know that some of you here present love him. His name was Cicero. One day he wrote Historia Magistra Vitae. I don't have to translate for you. You know all languages. History is the teacher of life. If we forget about history, we will never give a future to our children and to our grandchildren. By the way, one risk today is that the globalized economy will kind of change cultures, diminishing the immense variety, which is a heritage of all humanity. The disappearance of a culture can be just as serious or even more serious than the disappearance of a species or of a plant or an animal. And such cultural extinction can in no way be seen and considered as development. Now, authentic development, my dear friends, Pope Francis says very clearly, it's to bring about an integral improvement in the quality of human life, and this entails considering the setting in which people live their lives. As human beings, we make efforts to adapt ourselves to the environment, and this we should do every single day. The need to protect these common areas, visual landmarks, and urban landscapes that increase our sense of belonging, of rootedness, of feeling at home, is so important to humanity, to all of us. Now, he's considering now something that we have mentioned. Several of my fellow speakers have mentioned this. He's considering situations of extreme poverty, especially in areas where there is lack of harmony, lack of open spaces, or the potential for integration. It is there that can occur incidents of brutality and exploitation of criminal organizations. Other places in the world, as you and I know, we have lack of housing. This is also a grave problem. Having a home greatly influences the sense of personal dignity and the growth of the family. When poor live in an unsanitary slums, dangerous tenements, in cases where relocation is necessary, like the problem of migration that we have today, suffering must not be added upon suffering, and adequate information and decent housing choices must be offered. Human ecology implies another profound reality, namely the relationship between human life and the moral law. Moral law. Sometimes we figure as soon as we mention moral, well, it's kind of away from me or anything of the kind. No, which is inscribed in our own nature, as we were saying before, and is necessary for a more dignified environment. An integral ecology is inseparable from the common good, which is a central and unifying principle of social ethics. What is the common good? It is the sum of those conditions of social life that allow social groups and their individual members relatively throughout and ready access to their own fulfillment, the Pope says. Respect for the human person, endowed with basic and rights order to his or her integral development. This is fundamental to the principle of the common good. Now, the notion of the common good also extends to future generations, thinking of the future. There cannot be any discourse on sustainable development apart from integral solidarity, also and especially with future generations. And here's a fundamental question. What kind of world that we mentioned before we are going to give to our children, future generations? So here I come to the our part most probably that will interest all of you, the climate change and global peace. In recent years, there has been a sea change in the way we talk about climate change. Once it was considered an environmental issue, then an energy problem. Now some see it as a threat to international peace and security. Some years ago, for instance, the president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, called greenhouse gas emissions an act of aggression by the developed world against developing countries. The extent to which the climate change debate is becoming a debate about security presents us with both risks and opportunities. Risks. First, the direct predictions border sometimes on scaremongering. Many climate change campaigners regularly default to worst-case scenarios. These risks spreading climate change fatigue among the public, a sense of hopelessness and resignation. We don't need this. In the face of an unbeatable challenge, it is not unbeatable. Second, dire predictions about coming climate wars imply that climate change requires military solutions. You and I know. At the United Nations, we talk about peace, but we know for a fact, I don't know if you know this, right now we have 17 wars raging across the globe. Are we doing anything for it? I leave that question in the air. Third, the international community needs to ensure that this does not become a north against south situation. If you take a globe and go around the 30th parallel with your finger, you will realize that we have most of the population of the world is under the 30th parallel, and also only 1/3 of the wealth of the world is down there. Up, we have less of the population of the world and the rest of the wealth of the world. So on the positive side, however, a climate debate within the context of national and international security might just be able to marshal sufficiently compelling arguments to encourage the politicians to do something about reducing emissions and investing in adaptation. We are beginning to realize that the speed and scope of climate change, the way it threatens to affect where we can live, where we can grow food, where we can find water, could undermine the economic and political stability of large parts of the world in the coming years. So we should do something right now. Climate change poses some very real security concerns, even though these are rarely discussed. For example, if we take the Middle East, public and political attention tends to focus on the many immediate dangers that trouble the region. This is the beginning to change with the growing realization among regional analysts that climate change may present a real threat to their security in the Middle East. The Levant already struggles with scarce water, food insecurity, erratic economic growth, each of which could be eventually exacerbated by climate change. So we have right now a reduced water supply coupled with growing demand. This in some places is leading to increasing competition among different sectors of society, different communities, different countries. Already 1/3 of all people in Africa, as we have mentioned, live in drought-prone regions. Using a range of models, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimates that between 350 million and 600 million more people in Africa will be at risk for increased water stress by the middle of the century. Water. Reductions in crop yields and increasingly unpredictable weather patterns around the world may also be a cause of conflicts. Changes in sea level, increased natural disasters, the reduced viability of agricultural land may cause large-scale destabilizing situations. Climate change may hinder economic growth, thereby worsening poverty and social instability. Climate change may also lead to destabilizing forced migration and increased tensions over existing refugee populations. So perceptions that resources are shrinking as a result of climate change could increase the militarization of strategic natural resources. The final dimension is that the cumulative impacts of all these factors, combined with more frequent natural disasters and increases in diseases such as malaria, threatening the other maladies that we have mentioned during yesterday and today. They have to be avoided. There are ways to pursue peace and sustainable development despite a changing climate. It is possible that climate change, a shared threat like no other, may encourage countries to work together despite political and ideological differences and tackle the common challenge. In so doing, climate change could become a vehicle for reapproachment and peace building. My dear friends, as Pope Francis argues in his encyclical, this is a shared challenge beyond the capacity any country to tackle on its own. Thankfully, there is room for intervention and prevention, and we should do it right now. Let me make it a lighter approach to what I just said in this important encyclical. You know the story of the 3 ships? You do not. I'll tell you. At one point, God got so mad with the world. He said, we are going to have another flood. So, sure enough, when God says something, the flood comes. But there was everyone, since we have the mass media start talking about, everyone they built boats, so they knew that the flood was coming, so, except this one man, John Jones. He said, well, God will take care of me. After all, I've been doing my duty all my life. I've been very faithful, so he's going to help me. Well, sure enough, the flood came. And so the poor John Jones is waiting at home. One ship passes by. Friends, hey, come. Hey, you don't want to be drowned? I mean, do something about it. Come, join us. No, God will take care of me. Then, can you hear me now? Or if I go around, I think I better. And the second, naturally, time passed and the water reached his, almost his chest. And another ship passed by. He said, hey, come, you still have time. Do something. God will take care of me. Then the water continues to rise to his foot. And a third boat passes by, and he goes, no, water God will take care of me. Sure enough, the John Jones drowns. He goes up to heaven. St. Peter, he says, I want to talk to the boss. I mean, I thought that there was justice here, at least in the world, but especially here in heaven. He said, I want to talk to him. I said, why? He said, well, I'll tell you. I was supposed to be saved, and I drowned. So he goes to the good Lord. And the good Lord, he said, well, this is the problem. He said, well, let's take the book of life. They take this huge book of life. What's your name? He said, John Jones. John Jones, son of, and there is a note next to each one of us, I guess, So the poor Lord looks at him and he said, listen, you must be really stupid. I sent you 3 boats, you didn't take any. So, my dear friends, we have the 3 boats. We have to try our best. I have a friend at the United Nations called Antonio Guterres. He is the Secretary General. The beginning of his term, I told him you should follow whatever someone wrote a long time ago, Anthony of Padua. He looked at me and he said, Monsignor, that's your first mistake. He's Portuguese. He said, that's Anthony of Lisbon because he was born. Whatever, I said. The words are these. Actions speak louder than words. Let your words teach and your actions speak. Antonio Guterres said, this will be, and I will try to make it work here at the United States. It's very difficult. But Mother Teresa used to tell me all the time, the past is gone. Whatever we have not done in the past is gone. The future is still to come. What counts is the present. So let us begin now. Thank you.